Today's speaker, as you probably guessed by now, is about baseball. Before I introduce our speaker, however, I wanted to mention that the Dane County Rotary Clubs are planning a Rotary Night at Madison Mallards on Saturday, August 13th at 6 p.m. The Mallards will feature Dane County Rotary as their charity spotlight that night, and our club's baseball family fun and Second Century Fellowship groups will be helping to promote this opportunity for all Rotarians soon. And with the 2018 Major League Baseball season just underway, today's speaker is going to tell us about baseball in the Midwest. Greg Reinhard is a former professional baseball player for the Tampa Bay Rays and Chicago Cubs. He grew up actually in Marinette, which he said is 2 9-irons away from Michigan. He's a Whitewater grad, majored in history, so he's a good person, we know that. And he also owns and operates GRB Academy, which is in Windsor, not far from here, considered one of the top academies for baseball development in the country, having had almost 200 college athletes coming from the academy in the last 7 years. We look forward to your presentation, Greg, and we've made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. And as we welcome Greg to the podium, remember Q&A afterward, if time permits. Please use the mics. There are 2 roving people with those because the program is being recorded. So, Greg, welcome.
Hey, thank you all for having me speak today. And thank you for showing up. I actually this morning thought that there was a lot of reasons that people shouldn't show up. One, if you were optimistic about spring, that was quickly squashed, but not as bad as my hometown where my dad told me he had 10.5 inches this morning. So he's not feeling baseball spirit at all. Second, for the guy who was the Cardinals fan that yelled out, you definitely should have stayed home after last night's performance in the end. And finally, for all the Brewers fans, thank you for just not having that last beer after those 2 home runs. So you're here, which is good. And to squash that optimism, I still am picking the Cubs to win the division. I know. Hey, they've been good for a long time. I want to start a little bit with a little bit about myself because I think it plays into the story of baseball in the Midwest, and particularly in Wisconsin. Being from Marinette, I am a product of Little League Baseball, of Legion Baseball. My dad was actually the Little League president. I was a 2002 high school graduate where I decided to go to Whitewater. Went to Whitewater, played there for 3 years, and then was drafted in the 6th round by the Tampa Bay Rays, and was also the National Player of the Year that year. And then when I got to pro baseball, I was in Tampa for 2 years and then got traded to the Chicago Cubs, which is not why I'm picking them. But played there until 2010, was not good enough, which is why I'm here today. And then have GRB Academy with my partner Max, who is actually here today. Along the way, being from Wisconsin, it is a challenge, and being from the Midwest itself is a challenge inside the game of baseball. For a couple reasons. One, the weather is not very good. I'm supposed to have a clicker up here, right?
Second shelf of the podium.
Second shelf.
Right. Oh. I'm sorry. That's shelf 1. There's 2.
All right. One, the weather, but in Wisconsin, there's a limited number of people who can give you guidance that is correct in the path that you want to go if you want to be a baseball player. And from a recruiting standpoint at that time, I probably would have had the opportunity to go to some different schools. I'm very thankful for the path I took, but that plays into a bigger conversation about what Max and I do now. And then when I got to pro baseball, I did not have an agent in the draft, so I had no one to do any of that stuff. And along the way, I've met a lot of great people that have helped formulate my thought process on paths that athletes should take, and how to raise athletes and good people, and then get them directionally in positions that can help them long term. We have players go to varying levels of colleges from our program. I know that my son will pick the one where the education is the best, and we have a lot of families that do that. We do have some that choose for the baseball, and I think just, the full picture of why you play baseball and what you want to do for you long term is very important. So some of those pieces will play into a bigger conversation that I'm hoping to have here today. So as I said, Max and myself own the GRB Academy. It is in Windsor. It started off in Madison. We just built a new 52,000 square foot facility, which was our dream from the beginning, to build a place where players could practice baseball at times of the year when it is not available. And the mission statement, which is to advance the skill sets of baseball and softball players by providing them with the best trainers, with the best up-to-date, innovative training methods. Our initial slogan was baseball for the serious player. We started with baseball only. It has morphed to baseball and softball for the serious player, but really to build a stronger base of both sports in Wisconsin. That is the outside and the inside. So it feels like summer every day, regardless of how you guys are all feeling today. So the goal of academy-based programs, and this plays into a bigger picture of what baseball is going to look like. Whether people like it or not, I particularly, as a travel baseball person, am not a huge travel baseball fan, but I think it's where the future is somewhat heading for youth sports. One, instill the love of the game in the youth program. That's important because you have to remember that these are kids that you are raising. And if anyone played baseball here when you're younger, you did it out at the park with your friends, and that's how you built your skill sets. Create really good high school baseball players. That is our first piece on the agenda that we want to do. We want kids to go to their local high schools with their friends and be really good players. And then once you're in high schools, when we evaluate and say, can we get you to move on to a 2-year, 4-year school and better your education along with still getting a chance to play the game that you love. And so just our personal results. Since 2010, we've had 191 college baseball players, 2 major league draft picks out of high school. And of those 191, 78 to Division I schools right out of high school, and then another 58 to scholarship schools, and then 55 to Division IIIs. And I'm a Division III product, so we are not partial either way. It's more about the opportunity. And so why is, Wisconsin on the rise is what I titled this, is in the last 5 years, the state of Wisconsin has become a baseball powerhouse from a national recruiting area. And it is not our work. We certainly are part of it. But reasons why it wasn't before is it's traditionally just not a baseball state. The weather, the lack of skill development, the lack of organization of the sport. And finally, football is a really big part of this part of the area of the country and all the Midwest, specifically with the Big Ten stronghold with football. So just a quick peek by the numbers. In 2002, which was my graduation year from high school, there was 10 Division I players. And you can look, all of these numbers sit below 20 up until 2014. And then you look at what has happened from 2015 on, which is pretty incredible. The state has really become kind of a mainstay for recruiting coordinators to be in. And why? One, there's been a lot more development. You're starting to see programs organized better. The Milwaukee area, I think every city has multiple teams. The college reach, meaning there's more people with the thought process of getting kids to move on to higher education. And then lastly, there's just more baseball being played, and some of that is the winter indoors, and a lot of recruiting people see that Wisconsin was kind of the Wild West, where there were still a lot of athletes that were not recruited. There's a lot of bigger athletes here, and they're generally raw. And then when they go to college, they have a chance to be refined by the college coach. And then we're going to look at the draft numbers, because this is kind of indicative of what still has to happen. This is 2017 in Wisconsin. There was seven players drafted. That includes college and high school players. Illinois has 54. That's a vast difference. I know there's some population differences, but they're probably dealing with mostly the same weather that we are. And then you look at Michigan and Indiana, and some of those states are still ahead. So despite the fact that college recruiting is increasing here, we still have some challenges with the Major League Baseball draft. And then 1990 to 2012, there was one first-round pick total in all those years. 2016, there was one. Was that Gavin Lux or Jaron Kendall? Gavin Lux in 2016. He was out of Kenosha, shortstop for the Los Angeles Dodgers. 2017 was a kid by the name of Jaron Kendall out of Holman, Wisconsin. He actually played in Madison. He was a first-round pick by the Dodgers and signed for $2.9 million out of Vanderbilt, which is really awesome for a kid who's 20 years old, if that's what you're trying to do. And then in 2018, there's possibility three. There's a player in Janesville, there's a college hitter in Nebraska, and then there's a no-doubt first-rounder out of Waukesha. So the exposure of players is starting to escalate players up the draft board. Still low overall total numbers, but there's probably the expectation that that number will rise in the years to come. So I'm going to get into a little bit about the national sports health in general of sports for youth athletes, which I think a lot of people are passionate about. There's something called the sports and fitness industry. They do a study every so many years and continue to update it on for a lot of reasons. Some is like cardiovascular health, some is just active of children and youth sports, but they usually do it between the ages of 6 and 17. And so from, you see up there, 09 to 14, they did a study on 17 different sports. They ranked them where everything's at. And overall, there was a sports decline of 9% in that time, which is really concerning because I think almost everyone in this room probably at some point in time was out doing something as a kid, and it's good for you. So there's a 4.5 million athlete decrease in our country alone playing sports of any organization. So you can look out of all the kids in the country, in 2008, 45% of kids got out and did something, and it's down to 36% in 2016. Notable sports, and this is where I get excited and why I have an indoor baseball academy at this point in time. Baseball had a 4.3% decline in that same period of time. I think all of you have probably had the thought about football and the concussions and everything happening. In that time, there's been an 18% decrease in football players. Soccer, track, and then wrestling has really been hit with 41% of people not playing anymore, or a decline, sorry. But contact sports in general, we see going down, and we see non-contact sports still going down, but just not at such a rapid rate. So Major League Baseball launched the Play Ball initiative in 2015 to combat that. And then in 2016, baseball, and they lump it with softball, was named the most played sport in America, which I think is a shock to a lot of people. Is a little bit of a shock to me in the last few weeks when I was going through some of this stuff and trying to make sense of some stuff to present here today, was that baseball is a healthy sport. It is dying in some areas. Inner cities have had challenges with organization, but you do see more northern states getting involved. It's always been obviously wildly popular in Texas and Florida and California. But an important piece that ties into this is the president of the sports, fitness and industry said it's important for baseball to just take their casual players at this point in time and turn them into serious players. Which is kind of cool that our motto is baseball for the serious player. But it's an important time in all aspects for youth sports. But you see baseball kind of turning the corner. And so how does Wisconsin grow is an interesting thing. We have an organization. There are a lot of organizations that are popping up. And whether your opinion is that you're for travel sports or non-travel sports for kids, There just needs to be more organization and more organizations in general for the sport, meaning there just can't be a few main players, and that's what we have right now. There needs to be better instruction. I said this to Max the other day, and Ellsworth brought it up or in our conversation, he brought it up, not up here. In all of youth sports, 19% of the people who coach it have previous experience in it, meaning 1 of every 5 have played the sport, which is hard. Like, I'm not a great golfer, but I like to do it. But when I do it, I try and find someone who's really good at it to teach me because they can do it. So in the sport of baseball, where there's a lot of unwritten rules and there's a lot of different ways to play the game, only 1 in every 5 people that step out there to teach a 10-year-old how to play have ever played the game organized. And that goes for all sports. There needs to be more complexes, not indoor necessarily. We have a good amount of those, but outdoor. And that goes into a conversation about the city of Madison. There's a lack of baseball fields right now for kids to play. I know that GRB is currently involved in conversations with the city of DeForest. When we announced that we were building over there, they announced that they were going to build 4 baseball and softball diamonds that we would have usage on, but was still meant for the community. And that's a good start. We need about 13 fields a weekend if we want to really organize and run tournaments and provide opportunities for kids to play more. And so we are in conversations to build more fields, but it needs to happen, not just in DeForest, but in general in Madison. I think I've seen people who are alumni of Madison West frustrated with their field opportunities right now for their high school team. And I know their West Little League has really great fields, but you start seeing people call for more avenues for kids to get out and play. And then positive influences. I put Badger baseball. It's probably a sore subject. But it would help, right? Obviously, if there's a Big Ten team in your state, kids are excited about it, which is why football has been such a great stronghold. You see basketball on the rise in Wisconsin over the past few years of their success. And there's been a lot of calls for action lately for the Badgers to introduce baseball back. I don't think it's happening. I'm not for or against it. Obviously, it would make my life easier. But just for viewing purposes, I put pictures of 2 guys that are going to be big leaguers that probably would have went to Wisconsin. And also what the Badgers starting lineup would look like this year and where the players are actually playing instead. There's some pretty good schools there. Mary O'Brien's grandson, Kian, actually played for us and is currently at Kent State. So she has an idea of the program. He didn't make the list, but certainly we could have made like 10 lists long of players that are in really good baseball schools that have come from the state of Wisconsin. So, and there's the pictures, just to rub it in. But looking at baseball in the Midwest in general, it's really healthy. The organization of the state of Wisconsin that is working hard to catch up to the state of Illinois, where baseball is king. We can tell from their football and basketball programs. That's true. You're starting to see like this big shift where baseball is becoming a main sport. And it's not just because football is declining because they're in different seasons, but you're starting to see a revival of America's pastime. For me, steroids, watching people hit home runs with steroids obviously helped me like baseball, but you're going to see that go away for younger kids. But you're starting to see baseball in general grow as a sport in a lot of states, and Wisconsin is one of them. I'm very passionate about it because it provides a lot of opportunity for players. Actually, 6.9% of high school baseball players play college sports. And that is the second highest of all sports. I believe ice hockey is about 11% of players play college hockey. With ice hockey, even though they only have 58 Division I schools that carry the sport, basketball is like 1.8%. So from a youth sports standpoint, great for development, great for a lot of team skill sets. The long term of helping kids get to an educational school in that sport is more challenging. So hopefully it continues to go. My call for action today was hopefully, a little bit of education, but talking about the complexes and things that are needed in the area for the sport to continue to grow. So we're working on it in DeForest, but hopefully we'll see some more places around town start to carry the ball and build some new facilities. So that is kind of, where I wanted to get to. I wanted to make some jokes about the Cardinals just once. Give a little bit of data and talk a little bit about what we do. So I will open it up for. I'm in time. You didn't even have to give me the stop card. That's great. If anyone has any questions, I would love to take them.
Thanks for coming. I remember lots of chilly spring training days when my kids played Little League, both boys. Mm-hmm. And what I notice is that in the younger times, there are several girls on each team. And by the time they hit the second tier of Little League, they're gone. And when I see how much many communities put into baseball, which mostly benefits the boys, it's 50% of the population isn't on your roster no matter where they go to school. Please address that.
Well, it is true. And we started a softball program 2 years ago because of the importance that I think you see a lot of communities shifting to softball programs, and it's a great avenue for women to get to college there's some real financial positives for women that play softball and get themselves to school. Now, certainly in Wisconsin, softball, just like baseball, is behind, especially from recruiting. They recruit very different parts of the country. Our first year of softball program, we had a girl commit to Yale. And taking those situations for women to get to really high academic places and sometimes using sports to get there. So she used softball to get to Yale. We also had a player use baseball to get to Harvard, where he would not normally have been accepted. He was probably just short of the standards, but they have some different standards for admittance for athletes. But I agree. I think that, with Little League, you see so many Little League communities introducing softball programs, which is important for sure.
There was, back here, question. There was in the news recently the controversy about the guy who bunted after the other team hadn't held the guy at first base. I don't know if everyone watched that, but any thoughts on that? Or how many, you mentioned unwritten rules of baseball, having played at the pro level, how much of that is there? Sliding hard into second, all that sort of stuff. I've always wondered about that.
So there's a lot of unwritten rules, and they're mostly pretty harsh, right? Like people get really mad about them, and there's team fights that follow. Your specific case that you're talking about, the new shift that is happening in defensive setups for Major League Baseball, where the third baseman goes and plays rover in center field because the left-handed hitters pull happy. I don't care for the shift. I'm more of a baseball purist. It's analytics is the way it's going. Does he deserve to get hit the next day? Probably. Pitch. I mean, it's self-monitored, which is nice, especially being a former professional pitcher. Like the guy had a one-hitter. He just needed 2 more outs. You're down 7 runs. Probably not the wisest move. I think you're going to see that a lot in the shift. One, because it's the pay scale for Major League Baseball is so elevated that 4 extra hits a year, puts him in a different category when it comes to arbitration and some of the salary stuff. So I think you may see it more. I think you'll see the rules of baseball maybe lax out on it a little bit. But yeah, the unwritten rules are awesome. It really keeps the game in check. And inside the clubhouse, it keeps rookies sit there in silence for a good year and a half before they're allowed to speak. But they're there and they're real for sure.
Sure. Hi there.
Hi.
I only have one daughter, so I don't know about the baseball or sports for boys, but I'm curious as to why such a decrease in sports activities. I thought maybe because IT, digital, things might take some kids away. But then Ann informed me, who does have a son, that there's fewer opportunities for casual sports for certain kids. So what's happening? What's your thought on that?
I would think that there's a lot of different reasons. Certainly, technology, different interests. It's a changing world. There's probably less free time for kids to play sports, right? Kids' lives are drastically different now than they were 25 years ago. But I think the opportunity things as well is part of the decline. I also think there's, sadly, there's programs are disappearing with some city funding, and some high school funding is disappearing, and you're starting to see college sports disappear. I know Eastern Michigan dropped their women's softball program the other day, and Akron dropped their baseball program. And so some of the funding and even individual financial pieces play into some of the opportunities, which is not great, but it's a challenge certainly that's ahead in youth sports.
Can you tell us what impact the Mallards have had on baseball in Wisconsin and their league and other leagues like it?
They have been awesome for the city of Madison. They are one of the forefront leaders in the Northwoods League. I know those guys well, and actually pitched in Mallard Stadium several times playing for the Woodchucks. I think it's good. I think the more baseball that energizes the community and young kids is super great for youth sports. Baseball's a boring game in general, and it is. Ellsworth, it's just like history, right? It's just one thing after another. Yeah, game over. Yeah. It has been really good. I think they do a fantastic job, and their model is probably where more minor league places are trying to get to, which is more entertainment to keep younger kids at the park and watching and making it a more family atmosphere. Obviously, like the big leagues, that's not a family atmosphere most times. It's really expensive, but they give good opportunities for pricing.
I have several family members who've had wonderful college sports experiences, either D3 or serious college club sports. And I'm curious to know, among the high schoolers you deal with, those who are not fairly obvious pro prospects, what portion of them are interested in saying, what's the most competitive college that I could play for, as opposed to, did we lose it? As opposed to, I'd like to get into the best school I can as a result of sports.
So a little bit about our program is, and this plays into that question, when someone gets to high school, we try and identify really quickly, and we generally do, that they're recruitable. Sometimes it's freshman year, sometimes it's sophomore, junior, senior year, but almost always it starts with an individual sit down with myself and the family or Max and the family, and we discuss some of those similar goals, because we have had players give up playing college baseball to go be doctors, certainly a positive thing. We've had players turn down, the player that went to Harvard, he turned down a full scholarship to Indiana. He turned down a full scholarship to Tulane, both really great schools, to choose Harvard. I think it's always an individual, and we individualize the recruiting thing where we sit down with the family and we say, what are your goals out of this? Because you're finally to a point where you are good enough. You've made it through, and you're going to have an opportunity. Now, what do you want to make of it, or what is the best case scenario for family? We've had families with limited financial resources who we've picked the best education for the best value with the best baseball. We've also had people pick, average baseball, high academics, willing to pay more. So certainly it's on an individual basis at our place.
You see a difference between the players who come out of some of the really big high schools where the coaches in many of the sports say, well, no, if you're going to be football, you're only going to play football and you're going to do it all year round, versus somebody like you who went to Marinette High and you may have been involved in 2 or 3 sports. Yeah,
I'm a 3-sport athlete, and that's what we actually prefer, that players play multiple sports, because the development, it just shows that it's better, and rest periods for different sports are important. Part of the reason Wisconsin struggles is there's some limited skill development, and some of that can be cured with some specialization. I would actually have it the other way where they're just raw. But some high schools certainly say like, hey, you're going to play this sport or you're not going to play any. You're not going to play multiple. And it can help on the short term, but I think like for college, they may be ready a little bit better or quicker to play in college, but the long-term decline in their athleticism probably hurts them 4 years out. So certainly there's a lot of arguments on that, like heated arguments that I just stay out of, but I have some opinions. Three-sport athletes are two-sport, three-sport, multiple sports are important. There comes a time, where maybe some of their financial scholarships and some of that talks where they need to specialize a little bit later on. So.
Hi, just a quick question. My son is 7 years old, and when we played sports at our ages, younger, we played basketball, softball, whatever was going on at that time. It didn't matter. But I'm seeing that children are being asked to by their coaches at such a young age to choose one sport and play that sport all year long. And I mean, that takes a toll on a body, and the injury prone to, more injuries than what we've seen in the past.
Without question, that was at our table. Mary is a former orthopedic, and Ellsworth posed a question like, there's a lot of injuries in football. What about baseball? And we talk about the Tommy John epidemic or the shoulder epidemic that's happening, and a lot of it is from specialization. I think if you run into that, you should run from that coach and that program. We always tell people, like, if it's basketball season and we're having baseball practice, like, go to basketball game. If you can make it to the baseball practice, cool. But we don't throw to combat specialization and the wear and tear on the body. Like, we have a no throw. Players are not allowed to throw from October until January, because like there has to be a shutdown period. Otherwise, like certainly, and same as like if you just play basketball year round, like you are probably going to have some challenges in ankles and knees running on hardwood floors. That's with anything. So yeah, the specialization young too is really concerning. Yep.
When I was a kid, we didn't play too many organized sports.
Yep.
And it seems to me that because all we needed was a place to play.
Yep.
That seems to be a thing of the past. If my kid is going to play hockey, he's going to have skates, shin guards, pants, helmet, shoulder pads before he ever steps on the ice. Same with baseball. Play.
It certainly has changed, and my dad being a Little League president, we've had a lot of conversations about why is participation rates like out in the park or on the lake when it's frozen change. I mean, you see Minnesota, they're still a leader in hockey because there's not really organization all the time. They just go out and play, and it's changed. I don't know if it's because there's more danger in the world for kids to be alone at the park than there was 20 years ago. I know I rode my bike to Garfield School every single morning in the summer and played tennis ball with all my friends. It just doesn't seem to happen. I don't know the reasons why, but it's disappearing, and it's actually hurting all sports in general.
You mentioned, 1 in 5 coaches played the sport. Skill development is one of the challenges in Wisconsin. What are we doing, or what are you interested in doing to address the opportunity for improvement in coaching?
So that is a challenge. We have done all the Verona Little Leagues and some other things, some other coaching clinics. The reason our program has been successful is 95% of coaches are non-parent with a college playing background minimum. And so within our own program, we have tried to change that because everyone has problems with so-called daddy ball or mommy ball or whatever, right? Like the kids, the coach's son is going to pitch, then catch, and then play short all in the same game. So that's our solution for our program. Long term, I don't have the answer. I don't know how people who have played and have loved the sport need to stay involved. And it doesn't always happen because there's time and they maybe don't have time or they don't have a connection. I think you see a lot of former players get involved when their kid is there, but they probably should be involved earlier. There's a lot of great baseball people in Wisconsin that have no connection to the game anymore when they should be the local high school coach or they should be the Little League president or development specialist or something, for sure. So Ellsworth cut me off, so I think I'm game over. So.
Thank you. And we stand adjourned.